going to tell you about some of the most exciting papers I've come across in the last 10 years. They've just transformed the way people understand prehistory. I'll say more about that in a moment. I should tell you that I've not had any professional involvement in this area. I taught in biological sciences and researched in biological sciences at Reading, but not this particular area. As background, until the papers I'm going to tell you about, the only real evidence about where we came from, the only real evidence came from archaeology. So, for example, when pot designs changed, the archaeologists could find that out. Then was the question as why did they change? Were the new designs brought in by immigrants from across the Channel? Or was it a fashion thing that residents copied new fashions that they had seen abroad? So whether or not migrations occurred, that's been controversial up until these papers. The new evidence we have is based on the study of ancient DNA. That's DNA from teeth or bones, which amazingly it's become possible to decode, to sequence, just in the last 15 years or so. But these new studies have shown definitively that migrations did occur and that they had massive effects. And I'm going to go on to tell you how and when it all happened. But we will start with looking at this, which is supposed to be a little puzzle as to where you might think, what you might think ancestors looked like. So you've probably come across number one. He's Cheddar Gorge man. He's a hunter-gatherer. I'll tell more about them in a moment. This is from the Neolithic, one of the first farmers. And this is a man from the steppes of Russia and Ukraine. So, as you know, present day humans, the ones outside Africa, they are descended from a migration, mainly descended from a migration out of Africa about 60,000 years ago. Since the Ice Age that's in the last 10,000 years, there have been there have been four major migrations into Britain. So first up were the hunter-gatherers. They came across about 9,000 BC. They were able to walk across because the English Channel didn't open up until about 6,000 BC. So they were able just to walk across. But after that, people had to come by boat. So the first to come across were the first farmers, about 4,000 BC. And then people from the steppe, they came about 2,300 BC. They brought with them bronze technology. And lastly, I'm going to tell about the Anglo-Saxons, who arrived around 450, 500 AD. And each of these groups had a major impact, which the archaeologists, of course, have been well able to study and have studied extensively, how the landscapes were affected, the amazing monuments they built, Stonehenge and so on. Burial traditions, that's very important because at various times people used cremation. And when they used cremation, then there weren't any bones or teeth, so you couldn't get any DNA. So you have to bear that in mind a bit. That could bias the results. But the material culture, that's the archaeology, the pots and the arrowheads and so on. And of course, what we're coming to is the genetic makeup of the population. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about how these genomes are sequenced. So what are genome sequences? So our DNA codes, for 20,000 genes. Each gene tells a bit about how the body is built. So 20,000 genes, each one has 10,000 nucleotides, and those are denoted by symbols A, C, G, and T. So if we look along here, we've got, this is a sequence that goes A, T, T, G, A, C, A, and so on. And the entire sequence, coding for all of the genes and a lot of junk, the entire sequence is called the genome. And it's about 3 billion nucleotides long. Now, going into a little bit of detail, not too much, there's, we get one genome from mum, that's number one, and we get one genome from dad, that's number two here. And so what is sequenced is just one. So, each genome is a double helix, and only one of the strands is sequenced. So let's suppose it's the purple strand, and they're color-coded, the nucleotides, the bases. So here we go, green, green, red, that's T, and then blue, that's C, and so on, all the way along. And the other, in the other genome, the sequence is the same. It's green, green, red, blue, and so on, except occasionally you get a mutation, a SNP, single nucleotide polymorphism, a SNP. So here you see that there's brown on that strand, but here it's green. So they're different, a polymorphism. And all the analyses that are coming up, they're based on analyzing the SNPs. So this is just to show it again. So that's one genome, there's the other, and the G nucleotide in the other genome is an A. Now, what happens next? This is a slide I used to use in teaching. So this was showing the differences between dogs and wolves. So the paper from which I took this is looking for the genes that differ between dogs and wolves. So this is on the x-axis is distance along the genome, and the chromosomes have different colors. So that's the first chromosome, the second one is green, and so on. And upon the vertical axis is the difference between the dogs and the wolves, as measured by a Z statistic. And the dashed line shows when we start to get interested. So you can look along here and find the SNPs that differ between the dogs and the wolves. So in the study, they had DNA from 12 wolves and 60 dogs. So there wasn't always a difference, but where there was a significant difference, the pointers come above the dashed line. And then so you use this to locate the SNPs that differ, and then you could look at the genes from which they come and see what those genes code for. And yeah, that's the first important point. You can also, if you've got an individual today, you can look to see how many of its alleles come from dogs and how many from wolves. So you might be able to show that this particular individual is 50% wolf, for example, on the basis that half its alleles are wolf alleles. And that's a very important way to look at the data, and that is used in humans in what follows. So we'll start off briefly with the arrival of the hunter-gatherers. They walked in about 9000 BC. The channel hadn't opened up at that point, didn't open up till 6000 BC. This is a reconstruction I may have seen before. This is Cheddar Gorge Man, reconstruction by UCL and the Natural History Museum. And oh, we went there the other day, and they've put a replica skeleton where the actual skeleton was found near the entrance of one particular cave. That's what it looks like. Okay, so that's all for the hunter-gatherers. Next come the first farmers. They came in much later, about 4000 BC, and we're going to look at where they came from and where they first settled. What I'm going to show is that the British Neolithic people were around 3/4 descended from Anatolian farmers, Anatolia in Turkey. The other bit of their ancestry came from the local hunter-gatherers. Then I'm going to go on to show that the Anatolian farmers migrated to Britain mostly through Iberia, Spain and Portugal, although some came through Central Europe. And they settled in Britain, mostly in the west of Britain, as far north as the Orkneys. So here's a reconstruction of a Neolithic woman from the reconstruction made and presented in Italy. And here's a Neolithic man who was buried, reconstruction by English Heritage from his genome. So his remains come from this barrow close to Stonehenge. Oh, and this one of my favorite monuments put up by the first farmers, this incredible dolmen. And there, of course, is Stonehenge. And we've got one or two around me. Oh no. So sorry. Should have turned that off, shouldn't I? So those are near me, and here's also an amazing cursus and a Neolithic henge. Anyway, how did they get here? So this is still a little bit controversial, but the consensus seems to lie with this paper by Sheridan from 2010. And this is a diagram that she produced that there was a migration to Ireland amazingly early, but the one we're interested in is just before 4000 BC, when they came from Brittany, they came up the west coast. And they went up, as we'll see, right up to Orkney, and they went to the west of Scotland and West Wales. A bit later, there was a migration much easier to get across the channel there, but they went up the east coast. But that was a couple of centuries later. And this west coast route, that's also espoused by Barry Cunliffe in his fairly recent book. And you may ask how they came. And of course we don't know, but they had to come by boat. What did the boats look like? Well, we don't know, but in my imagination, they were very large woven coracles with animal skin around the weaving, and the first farmers had to come across with a starter kit. So that would have been, well, they came with cattle. So I imagine they had a male and female calf. You'd have to truss the legs. And then they came with sheep and broad beans. What else did they have? Sheep, goats, pigs, wheat, barley, peas, lentils. Not necessarily all in the first boat, but those were the things which were later deployed, so they had to come across. So this is the first paper we're going to go into in any detail. What this shows is where the ancient DNA comes from. And the numbers show the number of individuals whose genomes were sequenced. So there were 4 individuals from Papua-Westray, that's in the Orkneys. A whole lot they've got from the Orkneys. They've got some from the west coast here of Scotland, west coast, and there's just a few from the west coast of Wales, and then a few from further east. By the way, do you see this? Do you see on the right of my screen? Is it obscured by a grid video? No, good, okay. Right, so that's where the DNA comes from. And the first question they asked was, which route did the first farmers take? Did they come through Central Europe or Iberia? And because there's quite a bit of ancient DNA available for Central Europe and Iberia, they were able to match up the samples from Britain that they were studying with ancient DNA from Europe and Iberia. So it's a bit like the dog-wolf comparison. Then they did simple Z statistic test on it. So if there's no difference, no discrimination, that's a Z value of 0. You remember the Z test, the first of all the statistical tests. So applying it to the data from Wales, you see that it's just above 2, that's significant, favouring Iberia. So mostly they had come from from Spain, Portugal route. And the same is true of England and Scotland. So the SNPs show that the British first farmers were more descended from the Iberian farmers than those from Central Europe. Both groups originated in Turkey, in Anatolia. So now we are going to look at the British first farmers. Did their DNA, how much of their DNA came from the local hunter-gatherers? Because when they got here, they did intermarry to interbreed to some extent. And so in this browny colour, we've got the hunter-gatherers. And so the Central European early Neolithic, they had interbred hardly at all with the hunter-gatherers. Almost all their DNA is from Anatolia. But in Spain, Portugal, we've got about 20% is from the hunter-gatherers. And going through Britain, it's around about 25% of ancestry was from the local hunter-gatherers, and the rest came from Anatolia. So that's what we have shown here. 75% descended from Anatolia, 25% from the local hunter-gatherers. The Anatolian farmers got to Britain, mostly via Iberia, though some did come through Central Europe. And the first to arrive settled in Britain mostly in the west. as far north as the Orkneys. So that is it for the first farmers. So next we go on to 2300 BC. This is just after Stonehenge was completed. Stonehenge was finished about 2500. So just after that, people from the steppe came in. And we're going to talk about where they came from. And I'm going to talk, of course, I'm just fascinated by this. As you know, these turn out to be most of our ancestors. How did they live in the steppes? And so this is an overview from Wikipedia, which is fairly accurate, and it's showing that where the origin people in the steppe were the Yamnaya, and so they lived in this. This is called the Pontic-Caspian steppe, and 100% of their DNA is Yamnaya by definition. So this is 3300 BC. So shortly after that, they started to move out. We don't know why, but they did move out. Maybe it got very arid and couldn't support them any longer. So they moved out and they moved west. And so coming through Germany to 2700 BC, and in this pie diagram, you know, there's about 70% of the DNA of those people come from the Yamnaya, and get to Britain, it says 50-50. It's actually more than that is from the Yamnaya, as we will see. But they also moved out east to these lands over in the eastern steppes, and they moved down to India. And you may know this is fairly well proved now, still a little bit of controversy. They brought the Indo-European languages with them. And so the Indo-European languages, you know, Italian, French, Spanish, but also Sanskrit, I think I've got that right. These all originated with these Yamnaya emigrations. So what did they look like? This is a man who was buried in the steppes about 3000 BC. How did they live? Well, they lived primarily as mobile pastoralists with big herds of sheep and goats and cattle and horses. And here's some horses on the steppes. They made wagons. The first wheels are credited to them. They made wagons, and they developed bronze tools and bronze weapons, and they used the wagons to carry their tents around with them. They practiced a little bit of agriculture in the valleys in the steppes. I find all this very fascinating. So here are some wagon graves with, there's a sketch of the wagons that were buried in these steppes in southern Russia, dated to about 3000 BC. And all this is written up by a very influential book, very readable, by David Anthony. It's become a bit outdated now that we have the DNA evidence, but a very readable, interesting book. So now we're going on to look at the DNA data. Where does the ancient DNA data come from? So on this map, it shows where ancient corpses have been used to, from them have been derived teeth or bones from which DNA has been extracted and the genomes have been sequenced. And this is the key to the diagram, and it's in order of time. So the oldest ones at the bottom, they're hunter-gatherers. And then as we progress through time, we go through the first farmers, the Neolithic, and then up to the Iron Age at the top. And the critical bit is between the I can't see it on mine. I have to move that. So it's the Yamnaya. They're in blue. There were 9 individuals yielded DNA and their genome sequenced of the Yamnaya. So that's where those individuals were buried, and we're going to compare that with the corded ware individuals who are these ones here. And there should be an arrow. Oh, there's some arrows showing, yes, that's what I've just been talking about. So that's the critical data. But here you can see we've got the DNA in the same order of time. So the oldest ones at the bottom. We go up in time. The Iron Age ones are up at the top. Actually, that's late Bronze Age. And critical is 2500 BC. And just like I told you, you can work out the ancestry of your dog, how much wolf is it. So you can work out for these data, how much of the data comes from the Yamnaya, that's in green, or how much comes from the early Neolithic, that's in orange, and we've also got hunter-gatherers in blue. But the extraordinary thing about this is you get this abrupt change at 2500 BC, and in all those sites, the DNA is replaced near enough by the Yamnaya DNA. Amazing. Oh yes, and the corded ware pots. The corded ware pots, they are associated quite closely with the Yamnaya. So they, I guess, acquired or brought those designs with them. So then they arrived in Britain. This is the next paper. Right, so this is a paper by Patterson et al. From 3 years ago. And this is where their data came from. They used a lot of ancient DNA from previous studies. That's shown by I don't know what color that is, the yellowish brown symbols. The new DNA that they extracted is shown by the black symbols. So there's a lot of data, and they were able to map this out in this. This to me is the most astonishing diagram. So along the x-axis, we've got years BC, and up the y-axis, we've got the percent of the DNA that comes from the, probably this is coming from Anatolia. And what you see is the individual sites, the DNA is shown with confidence intervals, and it's very high, the amount coming from Anatolia up until 2500 BC. And then the abrupt change, and then we're down at 30%. And it's the same for England and Wales that are shown in blue, as it is for Scotland, shown in green. And I'm just going to spend a moment talking about the Amesbury archer. I don't know if you've seen his remains in Salisbury Museum. Here he is. And he came with a metal working kit. It was a kit for making things out of copper. And he also had 3 copper knives. I think those are the copper knives. So that's the metalworking technology that he was bringing with him. So the steppe people, the Yamnaya, they migrated out of the steppes they're leaving about 3,300 BC. They arrived in Britain about 2,300 BC, and they came to make up, their DNA came to make up 65% of our population. How come there was this change? How did they take over? And we don't know. Was it the plague? Some other disease? Warfare? Competition for land? But we do know that there was bubonic plague DNA in some of the corpses, so it may be they brought the plague with them, and that accounted for the eradication for a lot of the first farmer DNA. Right. So next, we go on to the Anglo-Saxons. Paper from 3 years ago. Now they sequenced new genomes from 460 individuals, but there was also a lot of published data from over 4,000 individuals. So maybe that's what they looked like. So this is the newly sequenced DNA, a lot from the east of England, a bit from Ireland, and quite a bit from key regions of northern Germany, and that's Jutland. And what they found was that in the Bronze Age, pretty much all the DNA was British, Western British and Irish in origin. And that persisted through the Iron Age, but after the Romans left in the early Middle Ages, we get a transition. So now the sequenced genomes come mostly from continental Northern Europe. Right. So, right. So then they were able to look to see where the DNA had come from. And this shows 95% of the DNA. I remember they've got lots of other samples further south, but 95% of the DNA came from this region. So that's Jutland, the Jutes. The Angles came from here, and the Saxons came from further south. And this is exactly what Bede wrote in 731 AD. But people have argued and argued about this. Maybe he was making it up for some reason, but this shows that he was absolutely right. And this is from the supplementary material, which puts in some of the archaeological evidence. And so the pie diagrams show the continental northern Europeans in red again. Most of the sites on the east are them, but there's a bit if you go to the west, and certainly in Ireland, where you get the Western British and Irish DNA, but they've superimposed on this the location of the cemeteries, the early Anglo-Saxon cemeteries in green, and also the Frankish objects from France, again found in the east. So, there's an interesting detail in this paper too. So the immigrants included both men and women. That had been controversial. Maybe that people had thought maybe the men came over and slaughtered the local population. But no, both men and women came over and they mixed with the local population and they intermarried with the local population equally. The women with immigrant ancestry had better grave goods than the women with local ancestry. That's just what they found. But men with immigrant ancestry were just as likely to be buried with weapons as the locals. Right, so now how we do? We have, I think I've got time. Mary, have I got time to tell you one or two other little factoids?
Of course you have. Please do continue.
Right. So it's very fascinating for me. These papers have additional data. So this business about digesting milk, that's been a textbook example of natural selection in action for decades, my entire career. And then in this paper from 3 years ago, we find an entirely new slant on it with much better data. So to digest milk as an adult, you have to have lactase. Lactase has to persist through to adulthood. And that ability to digest milk as adults, that's only found in northwestern European populations today. Well, there are one or two populations in Africa, but we won't go into those. But the rest of the world, basically, they cannot digest milk as adults. That's why they make cheese and yogurts and so on. If they do drink milk, then they can drink a little bit, but after that they get diarrhea. So what the diagram shows is the points are individuals. So that's an individual, a Central European individual. There's one from Britain. And these ones, they have both their alleles at this locus are for lactase persistence, the ability to drink milk as an adult. So they could all drink milk as adults. And actually, that allele is dominant. So even the heterozygotes can also digest as adults. But these ones at the bottom, they can't. They can't digest it as adults. And so this diagram shows that no one could digest as an adult until 2,500 years ago. And then the ability to drink as an adult up here and here, that ability spread. The average of all the alleles for each location is shown by the curves. This is for Britain. Blue is for Central Europe. And the amazing thing is that it evolved in Britain and about 1,000 years earlier than it did in Central Europe. So to me, that's astonishing finding. Of course, as I say, it's an example we've been talking about for decades, and here suddenly it's illuminated by the new ancient DNA analysis. And the last little bit I wanted to talk about was the frequency of pale skin alleles. So this is Britain. So pale skin alleles were quite infrequent. They're about 20% back in 4000 BC. But then they've been rising. And by the Second World War, they got up to very close to 100%. So that's for Britain. It's relatively recent, this evolution of pale skins. By contrast, in Iberia, Spain, Portugal, they've only ever got up to about 70%, and they're now just under 80%. So as you know, pale skins allow you to synthesize vitamin D, which protects you from rickets. And that's why some of us are taking vitamin D supplements. Of course, we're not out in the sun enough, but it does expose us to the risk of melanoma. And so people who get enough um, vitamin D, those living further south, they have dark skins, which protects them against melanomas. Right. So I think that's about it. So natural selection to digest milk evolved in Britain in the Iron Age and only spread to Central Europe 1,000 years later. Natural selection for pale skin increased in frequency from 20% at the start of the Neolithic to 80% in the Iron Age in Britain, and after to 95%. And so what we've been looking at in summary is the arrival of the hunter-gatherers who walked in 9,000 BC. First farmers came over in boats about 4,000 BC. The arrival of the steppe people, 2,300 BC. Most of our DNA comes from the steppes. And the arrival of the Anglo-Saxons, 450 AD. So, yeah, thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you very much, Richard. Could you stop sharing so we can see you, please?
Yeah, I'll try and do that now. How do I do that? Oh, yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. That was fascinating. I mean, while we're waiting for some questions to come along, the one thing that struck me was how the ability to digest milk, the timing of it, was almost around the same time of the steppe people arriving.
Mm.
And it's a case of then it went back into Europe, so it shows the constant to and fro of the trade between the areas as well.
It's very good. I only
Brilliant.
noticed, only thought of that as I was talking, but yes, maybe it came in from the steppes.
Hmm.
I,
I was going to ask actually, particularly on that point, do we know anything about the kind of animals that they herded on the steppes? Because it would we would presume, of course, that in fact they had large herds of cows, and then it became genetically important to be able to digest the milk from those cows to give you a nutrition advantage and therefore a survival advantage.
that's
Do we know
very good.
anything about that at all?
Well, the herds were mostly comprised of sheep and
Okay.
goats,
Well,
and
they all make milk as well,
they
it's not
do
cows
absolutely,
more,
yes,
yeah.
and horses.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, there is some stuff on this. I just can't remember whether they did milk them. I'm sorry, I should remember, but I don't.
It's just fascinating talk.
Yeah,
Mm.
I mean, I know I'm just looking at what's in the chat, Richard, and I know that sort of we looked more or less from the Neolithic, so we weren't potentially looking at interbreeding with Neanderthals or Denisovians. But is there any evidence for the amount of DNA from those, yeah, originating populations from the DNA evidence?
well, yes, as you know, that has been looked at, but not in these studies. So that happened a long time previous to the Ice Age. There's nothing since. Well, of course, they'd all died out. The Denisovans um, and the Neanderthals a long time before. They were just talking about post Ice
Mm.
Age here.
But I guess the thing is as well, the further back you go to those kind of times, the number of samples that are available or that we found become very few indeed. Because you're probably, in the Ice Age, you're predating probably burial and so on, things would have been scavenged. So there probably aren't that many remains from those peoples anyway, I would
But
think.
the astonishing thing is they have found some, and there's there's a new paper came out just a few weeks ago
Hmm.
on the Denisovan DNA, uh, claiming, oh yes, it claimed a new species that was the ancestor of the Denisovans and the Neanderthals and was a sister species to Homo sapiens. That's what they claim. It was reported in The Guardian. You might have seen it.
I think the one thing that does amaze me is how many variations of the human theme there have been over time before we almost settled on Homo sapiens as being the one that was the most, shall we say, least specialized, perhaps, because that can be a curse and a blessing.
I don't know, but it is fascinating. I agree.
There's another question here that's saying, well, there's a suggestion in Britain 3000 BC by Rodney Castleton that there may have been some cooling around 3000 BC. I guess this is sort of the ebb and flow of potential small ice ages, that kind of thing.
Um, yes, that's good. Yes, I'm just trying to remember. Um, yes, yes, and there's a suggestion. Yes, there's data suggesting. Oh, yes, it's very disappointing. The first farmers they gave up farming and they started being mobile pastoralists, at least to some extent. I've not looked at that very closely. There's no DNA implications that I'm aware of from that, but that's a good point.
It's also interesting in terms of just thinking about the timing with the steps and what you were saying about maybe it dried out and so on. 500 years, how long did it take people to move across? They didn't just get onto their wagons and move straight across, did they? They would have done it in stages. So you
Yeah.
wonder if it was a similar event that started the migration, even.
Yes, good point. And yes, some people are talking about the speed of movement.
Mm.
That's that's being discussed at the moment, and some are arguing that actually the movement would only have been, I don't know, one generation would move further northwest and so on.
Mhm.
I think the eastern movements were probably much more rapid. Of course, they could move along across the steppes
Mm.
pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, John has come back and said he was thinking about the climate on the steppes when the migration started, which would have been pretty much that kind of thing. And there's also a question from Philip. Why didn't the Romans bring their own distinct DNA before the Anglo-Saxons?
Mm.
Um, there's been a great deal written about the Roman DNA in the last year or so. And of course, it was a great mix. It came from all over the place. And yeah, I don't know. I just don't know how much the Romans interbred with the locals. I don't,
Would it not have been quite difficult to tell, really, particularly since you originally had some Iberian, folk who were migrating from through the
yeah.
Iberian Peninsula. Probably that would not
Uh,
have looked all that different, would it, to be honest? So it would be difficult to tell really ancient DNA from the more recent DNA of the Romans, I don't know. It's just an idea, isn't it? But
they sent soldiers from all
they,
over the empire, didn't they?
They
So
did.
right, and they've got African DNA and Northern European DNA and
yeah,
just and Middle Eastern
But
DNA. So
I'm just thinking from what you're
interesting.
saying there, Leslie, just thinking about, Alexander the Great and so on and the empire
mm,
he had. And
right,
the genetic melting pot that would have potentially created.
absolutely,
I mean,
yeah,
it may
yeah.
have not been at the higher echelons of the Roman governing body, but certainly the soldiers, I would imagine, there would have been a lot of genetic mixing there.
Mm. We say genetic mixing, but there may have been a slightly superior thing
Indeed.
about the Romans, and maybe they didn't intermarry so much,
But
with the local
they're
yokels.
thinking of the troops more than anything,
Well,
sort of.
true, yeah, absolutely.
They,
They would have for sure.
they
Sowed their
met,
seed wide and far.
yeah.
Mm.
Right, so
Can
do we
can I
Go on.
Can I ask a question about one of your images, which I found really very fascinating, the reconstruction of Cheddar Man? Firstly, I am amazed I've never heard of him before because Cheddar is just down the road from Cheltenham, and I don't ever remember being taught about him at school or subsequently. But the burial in a cave would I know this is not really to do with genetics, but I wonder if you know. Would he have just been laid out in the cave, or would some preparation have been made which is long since disappeared?
Good questions. I don't know anything about that. You should know about the reconstructions, though. Of course, they made a big splash when they came out about 10 years ago.
I mean, the other thing that I find fascinating, I mean, I know in the history of our beloved planet, it's a tiny amount of time we're talking about, but I'm very surprised that all those reconstructions, they look so much like us, as though in the last 5 or 6 thousand, 8,000 years, our faces haven't changed very much.
The skin color, hair color. I've not talked about hair color.
I saw that Anglo-Saxon reconstruction had red hair, right? So, and I wondered when red hair appeared. I'm half Irish, so I'm interested from that
Oh,
point
it's
of
so
view.
fascinating. I'm
Yeah.
obsessed by red hair, but it's quite complicated, the genetics, and
Is it? Fair enough.
there's not been any very good uh, account of how it evolved and when it evolved. It's certainly within the last 5 or 6 thousand years. So these are very recent changes, aren't they, in evolutionary time? It's amazing, skin color, hair color, just 6,000 years.
Blue eyes, which is
And eye color,
as you
yes.
know, a recessive trait. So, uh,
I'm guessing blue eyes is for the same reason as, the lighter skin. If you're living up north where there's less light, you need to let more light in.
yeah, maybe.
Peter, did you have a question?
There was a program on the TV a few years ago. A friend of mine lives in York, and if you stick a helmet on his head with a couple of horns on, it very
He was a
much
Viking.
fit the stereotypical Viking. But the interesting thing was that I learnt that Keith had a disease which affected the ligaments in his hand and caused his fingers to migrate and to clench like that. And that this could be traced back to the Vikings. And it's a disease that was suffered by Scandinavians and brought over here. Because I remember when I watched this, I was in a hotel in London. Immediately got on the phone and said, "Hi, mate, you're a Viking." Because he has this disease that was particularly specific. So I would imagine, I mean, Leslie, you might know more about this than me, but mapping the spread of diseases like that, particularly ones that affect us physically in that way, could be quite an important process.
I mean, I think it's been done for, as you say, what you seem to be describing as Dupuytren's contractures in the
Yeah.
hand, and I think that certain diseases certainly have been shown to migrate through genomes, but I don't know anything very specific, to be honest, but that would tie into what you were just talking about. But
There are quite a few papers, ancient DNA papers on the spread of diseases. Of course, they largely spread in the last 5,000, 6,000 years.
oh yeah, yeah.
I can't
Fascinating.
detail.
Mm.
And I suppose the actual spread of those diseases where you can find the DNA does give you an indication of the migration patterns again, doesn't it? It all feeds into that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it certainly shows you the sort of ethnic influences that there are on the spread of disease, and of course that's very much influenced by the spread of the bugs that we are all full of and surround us.
Most of them internally are good for us, though.
Yeah, the internal ones on the whole are good as long as
Well, almost.
as long as we don't mess them up, and then
I would go so far as to say nearly essential to us, to be honest.
to be
We don't mess them up.
absolutely honest, at least as important as vitamin D and the effect of both of them on each other.
I keep seeing these figures that say we're actually more bacteria than we are humans, if you
Oh,
count
we
the
are
cells.
by a very large margin. It's multiples of 1,000 or 1,000,000 or whatever.
So maybe actually we're the means by which the bacteria move around, and we aren't the bosses after all. Who knows?
We are, and actually that's exactly that, where unfortunately diseases have overcome us, we've found a way around it, right? Life has always found a way, and even though the bugs keep mutating even faster than we do, we still seem to survive, so.
I mean, I must admit, I'm busy working on a presentation for a couple of months' time. It was one that you suggested, actually, Leslie. So,
Oh, was it
into this mess.
is it the X and Y chromosome
Yes,
thingy?
that's the one.
Oh,
You
I'm so looking
suggested it.
forward to that.
Well, it's
Sexual
amazing.
dimorphism is something I actually researched on about 1,000,000 years ago, just for a couple of years because it was just a
Oh,
little
well,
side thing.
I
So interesting.
I shall have to share it with you before I give it, just in case there's any input you can put
Oh
for me.
no, don't worry about that. And the stuff I did was I mean it was so specialized it wouldn't be relevant. So anyway.
But Jeanette, I've noticed your hands up. I do apologise.
Hi. That was really interesting, Richard. Thank you very much. I was just reflecting in that earlier conversation about when you look at things from here, how you can fire off down multiple paths. And in the last 2 years, we've done a bit of that in my family because I had a minor exploratory operation and found out that structurally I was like somebody of Asian heritage rather than non-Asian heritage. So we all went firing off and saying that's why we look like this, blah, blah, blah. And then around the same time, my brother had his DNA done and found out through our father's line, our shared father line, he was 11% Iberian. So we all went shooting off and said, that's why we look like this. So you do have to be careful with some of this. And sort of a final thing on that, my daughter's partner is a tall Glaswegian and in every sense, red-headed Glaswegian. And I was doing the normal checking him out exploration, and I said, oh, what's your sort of Scottish heritage? He said, actually we're Irish Lithuanian. So it's very easy when you stand at this side to be very misled by all these clues, or perhaps you're a mix of everything. But yeah,
But to be honest, being a mongrel is the healthiest way.
indeed.
Right.
Breathing
That's
is
always been my
not good
view.
Yeah, thanks, Jeanette. Steve, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Marianne. Thanks to Richard. That was very interesting. A couple of thoughts occurred to me. One is there any evidence that migrations have sort of been sourced in these islands and gone elsewhere? So has there any been movement from here to other places, or is it, being an island, are we represent a sort of end of the migration chain? And the second thought is whether this sort of analysis will be possible going forward, given the fact that migration is so much easier and so much more prevalent these days than it was, in the times you were talking about.
Yes, there's good questions. I don't think I've got much worthwhile to say about them. As you know, there were some Irish women mostly were taken off to Iceland, but of course that's only a small immigration. Basically, I think we're the end, the sink of all this until historical times.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, they ended up in North America, didn't they, really? You know. So,
When was the Welsh moved to Patagonia? There's a Welsh population in Patagonia, isn't there? But I don't know
Yeah.
how near history that was.
Well, I think they went there during some of the mining type eras, because there is a book by Bruce Chatwin called In Patagonia. And part of that is about the Welsh Spanish speaking part of the population, which is, it must be quite an interesting mix, Welsh and Spanish. I guess it's partially mainly Celtic, you could say. But I got the impression they went down there for mining.
What about sort of looking at this age? Do you think, you know, the chances of finding sort of seriously big migrations have gone away now because of the way the modern world works? Who knows, I suppose, is the answer to that.
Well, I mean, Steve, I mean, sort of not wishing to butt in on Richard, but the thing that strikes me is with global warming, we could be heading for some big mass migrations. How that
yeah.
show up in
Well, there are,
history.
if you think about what's happening right now with all the folks, with all the hoo-ha politically about migration, you know, there's no doubt that quite a lot of it's coming from Africa, right? And those areas in sub-Saharan Africa where it's becoming impossible to live, you know, and to survive.
Oh, thank you, Sue.
Thinking about our immigration, and again, it's relatively near history, but of course, the UK, America, and we talk about Ireland, Scotland, Wales as well, but America, Australia, New Zealand, you know, we still have this mentality that they are of us, aren't they? But actually, that's a very significant geographical differentiation.
It is. I mean, and Sue Thompson has just posted her husband's aunt is Argentinian and she speaks with a faint Welsh accent.
Ah,
It's
cool.
interesting.
Mary, does your cat want you to explain that she's from Persia?
It's actually a British blue,
Ah! I should have known. I should have known.
but there is some Persian mixed into them going back. So his name's Jasper, and he's a little pain in the backside at times. I do apologise.
I think he's got some human DNA, actually, to be honest, because he always wants to be in the frame, doesn't he? Bless him.
Lily is also a BSH, but she's blue and white. She's very calm and sort of reserved by comparison to him.
So,
But isn't it important to recognise that human beings, in the eyes of dogs, for example, we're generally the leader of the pack. But as far as cats are concerned, we're staff.
Absolutely.
absolutely. Yeah.
I totally accept my position in life. I wouldn't have it any other way.
So there was just something that went through my mind. This really follows on from what Steve has just mentioned. Presumably, there is no evidence then that we have what you would describe in North America or the Southern Hemisphere as First Nation people. We all came from somewhere else.
That's a really interesting point, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, of course, a lot's known about that now. So the Americas were populated by migration from
Europe,
Siberia. That that it's still being worked out, but it's kind of 16,000 years ago. Perhaps people started going across.
That must upset Donald Trump significantly, really.
We can only hope.
Well,
I don't think he's capable of comprehending it.
I mean, there was something on the internet recently, and I must admit, I'm sure, like a lot of us, you wonder whether stuff on the internet now has been created by AI. But when Trump recently met the new German chancellor, the chancellor presented him with copies of his ancestors' German birth certificates or whatever they were exactly.
Yeah.
And they were saying that he deliberately set out to make the point that you are an immigrant.
Mhm.
You're not a
Yeah.
true blood American, or certainly not First Nation person
I
at
mean
all.
I mean it's all ridiculous,
Mm.
this business, isn't it? Of
But
yeah,
it was a discrimination thing.
yeah.
This
Mm.
kind
Mm.
of papers
Mhm.
he took over just based on males, not
Mm.
females.
Mm.
So there's a huge part missing. And in modern times, not to care about the female sources and the female structures,
Right,
it's a
indeed. Yeah.
big failure, I think.
I mean, they spoke
Which
of
for
nothing if
Trump,
not misogynist.
and Trump is, of course, maternally Scottish, isn't he? The maternal line is Scottish as well. So I think some of that feedback gets given to him regularly in Scotland, although perhaps not directly from our politicians.
Yes.
Actually, I was going to ask something related to that, really, Claire. So, Richard, that research, has there been an overlay of maternal and paternal DNA? You made some reference to women's
It was
immigration flows, but
The
has there been
Anglo-Saxon
work
thing, yeah.
overlaying that?
just in the Anglo-Saxons, wasn't it, that they,
Mhm.
of course,
Mhm.
they can tell
Hmm.
the sex, but I
Oh,
don't recall,
easily, yes, yeah. Mhm.
Hmm.
I don't recall anything being made of sex except
Hmm.
in the Anglo-Saxon, where those are very novel findings that I put
Hmm.
in as detail, that the women came over with the men,
Mhm.
and from the burials they could tell that they intermarried equally, as it were, with the indigenous
Hmm.
population. So, but that's the only place.
Part of the reason I asked, I'm not a scientist by background, but my understanding from fairly limited reading is that maternal DNA, because it's actually come from the egg, is more reliably predictive over time. So that was part of the reason why I asked, because that I suppose the numbers are still quite small, aren't they? But actually, there might be something about validity and reliability coming from different areas.
They're more predictive of what?
Of actually the DNA, the reliability of the DNA over time. So you're not getting the mutation, as many mutations and change.
That's
Oh,
true. You
but
do
it's
get
the
less, yeah.
mutations that we need here, because it's the SNPs that give
Yes,
information.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. But I wonder again, because there's a reliance on that, what that means to the two streams,
Mm.
and the exclusivity of information that's coming from one. But anyway, I'm not a scientist, but you do always have to be
Mm.
careful about
I mean,
the gender reliability, really.
I mean, what you're saying there, Jeanette, makes me think it would be interesting to see the SNPs divided by male and female as well, because
Hmm.
it depends. You may have found more male bodies than female.
Yeah,
It depends
yeah,
on, a lot of things historically. And the
yeah.
other thing as well, in Scotland, the matriarchal line used to be dominant, or things used to pass through the matriarchal line. Because
Mhm.
basically, the obvious thing is, at least if you
Mhm.
do that, at least half of them comes from the family. If you go
Mm.
through the male's line, there may not be any genes there.
Mm.
Mhm.
Mm.
So
Mm.
yeah, that's interesting in itself, I think.
Mm. Mm.
And
It
isn't it
rather,
true? You can correct me because I'm afraid I'm no kind of expert at all, but isn't mitochondrial DNA uniquely female?
It is. It is. Yeah,
It
that's in
is,
egg cell.
yes, but none of what I spoke about deals with
Mm.
No, fair
mitochondrial.
enough. I realise that. Yeah, sure. Fair
There
enough.
has been, I was just going to say that there has been work since these studies looking at social structure, and that takes account of male-female differences. Oh, yes, there's quite a bit of work. It's just coming back to me. I haven't really got, yeah, I haven't made notes about this. I am, you know, I, this is an amateur interest, as it were, for me. But there is quite a bit on social structure, especially in the long barrows over in the West Country, where they've segregated the skeletons by sex, and with the ancient DNA studies, they can see who is related to who, and yeah, I can't remember the punchline, which is what we need, which will be, was it a matriarchal society? I can't
Mm-hmm.
remember, sorry.
No, but it's still interesting to have that kind of I mean, I guess we have to assume that for skeletons to be buried together, they're probably a family group of some kind, and they're probably the ruling group. It wouldn't just be everybody, I guess, who was buried there, not, but without a view of the size of the populations at the time. Okay, I'm just sort of looking here as well, back at the questions. And Anne has said that she was fascinated to see there were Neolithic bones found at Whitehawk, near where she lives. And you know, you've also mentioned that obviously cremation may produce gaps in the data because we just don't have the remains. And then Peter has mentioned Genghis Khan and the oft quoted thing of zero point 0.5 of the world's population, that's 16 million men carrying his Y chromosome.
Might explain a lot, mightn't it?
Oh,
Let's see if Donald Trump's got that one.
that would be interesting to find out, wouldn't it?
Richard, sorry, before I listened to your really interesting talk, and it's really sort of clarified for me what things are like that. So it's really helpful. But I'd also read quite a lot that, particularly the male population of the UK, but the population generally, was significantly Iberian, Spanish Iberian. Has that, and that was around the 2007 position, I think. Has that now gone, or is that also in that flow?
I don't think there's any gender differences in where we come from.
Oh, no, sorry, not gender. Oh, sorry. Yes, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I did split it between male and female, but in general terms, that most of British people are Iberian Spanish by background. But is it Brian Sykes? He was a very early archaeology geneticist, and he did some work on it. But it was around 2007. I think it was on Radio 4 a while ago as well.
So what we did see was that the first farmers came from Anatolia through Iberia. So, you know, Iberia probably 6,000 BC, and then got up to Brittany maybe 5,000 BC, and then started colonizing Britain at 4,000 BC. So there is that link, and then they did pretty much take over, but then when the steppe people came in, they displaced a lot of that. So we'd now only have, I don't know, just doing the arithmetic in my head, we might have 20% of our DNA had come through Iberia on its way from Turkey to Britain.
And just going back to your mention of Brian Sykes, Janet.
Yeah.
Are you thinking of the books he did called, I think, Adam's Curse and the Seven Daughters of Eve?
No, The Blood of the Isles. I've just found it.
Oh, okay.
Blood Isles. But it was around 2000. I've just posted it in the chat. It
Thank
was around
you.
2007, and I just wondered if the subsequent work on DNA had sort of shaken that premise down a bit. Don't know. Yeah.
I guess this is the trouble, isn't it? By the time some books are written, they're probably already out of date compared with the scientific learning. And it's
Well, it's not entirely wrong, is it, that it kind of started there, but obviously there's been so much has happened since that, as you mentioned, Richard, the fact that in fact it's probably the steppe people who are most responsible for our DNA, but there were waves before and waves after, you know. So, but if you're talking about where did it all start, then I guess probably it's not ridiculous to suggest Iberia, you know.
There's a comment here from John as well. Is it relevant that a mother's DNA contribution to a child was determined while she, the mother, was in the womb, as she was born with all of her ova already in her ovaries? And it's an interesting thought, isn't it? That basically you were probably being carried in your grandmother's womb because she was carrying your mother, and your mother was carrying the egg that became you. It's
Hold on. It's
very deep thought.
What about?
Yeah, it's a bit.
You know, we get half our DNA from each parent, so we only get a quarter from grandma.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking in terms of you've got the grandmother carrying the baby. So the mother has already got, if it's a female, she already has her eggs in her ovary ready to carry forward. And it's just interesting to me that you've got that many generations almost in one being at the same time. It's just more philosophical musing than anything. So, do we have any more?
But those over aren't produced. I'm trying to think how they're produced. It will be meiotically, won't it? So as a consequence, there'll be a lot of recombination
Well,
taking
exactly.
place
Yeah.
during that process. So whilst it might be easy to consider that the DNA, the nuclear DNA, is similar because of recombination, every one of those over could be, and probably is, absolutely different.
Definitely.
Otherwise, you would have far more people looking very like one another.
You would. I mean, you're
Yes.
saying that as well, Peter. It reminds me of one of the things I've learned. Because, I mean, sort of you learn this about mitosis and meiosis, and cell division as you do in biology. But you don't realize that, it's not just sort of one half of a chromosome goes forward and it remains the same all through history.
Exactly. It doesn't do that, doesn't
No,
it?
No, you get
Really.
bits that cross
And it
over,
is
you get
the
different
reason that
parts
every
coming
single one of us
down.
on this call looks different, right?
But I mean, I find when you look at the potential differences that happen, that's without epigenetics, it's incredible. The possibilities are endless, literally.
Well, like the lactase enzyme that Richard was talking
Hmm.
about, right? That came about probably because they were herding animals that produced milk, and they needed that gene to persist, so they could survive when it got harsh.
and of course there are similarities in the world too. If you think about um, saprophytic fungi, um, at some point the fungi, which is the main decomposer on the planet, was unable to digest lignin and cellulose right up until towards the end of the Carboniferous. But eventually it was able to evolve the enzymes that were necessary to decompose lignin and cellulose, which brought to an end in the Carboniferous the formation of coal. So, there's been precious little coal formed since that time because fungi is now able to virtually decompose nearly every part of a plant and pretty much an animal as well. And I suppose, all living things eventually, hopefully, unless they die out as a consequence of inability, um, develop a method of surviving within the environment that they are living in, that changing environment. And lactose would have been a similar process. Only with the fungi, it was over literally hundreds of millions of years. And with us, things have tended to be small changes, perhaps, but significantly shorter time frame.
But I think it also, like you're saying, it shows they were herding animals because obviously human babies have the ability to digest lactose from their mother's milk. But it's a case of if you then continue to ingest it from other animals, presumably you keep that going. It doesn't turn off in the same way as if you don't have it in your diet.
Just it's a very, very interesting point, because to be frank, you would expect the other people who don't have persistence of lactase, sorry, to not have survived so well or whatever. I don't quite understand it, but I mean, it's been very stark, of course, that people of Asian origin, for example, cannot digest lactose. They can't digest alcohol well, and it's all sorts of things that you sort of puzzle. Why was it an advantage in Northern Europe, and presumably it had something to do with herding their animals, and maybe the other populations relied on other nutrients. But I still find it a little weird, to be honest, don't you?
It is fascinating. Yeah, I mean, so
Mm.
maybe there was a hunger gap in Northwest Europe, and the ability to
Good point.
milk
Yeah, yeah.
in the hunger gap.
Mm.
But
Right.
it would still be very odd to me that it was in Britain, because,
Mm.
I mean, would Britain have been worse from the point of view of a hunger gap? You wouldn't think so. You'd have thought,
No, because it's milder here, isn't it? The
Yeah.
climate is overall milder, and that's probably why people came here, actually, is that living on an island off the continental coast of Europe, the weather in general was milder and more prone to survival, I think.
And could that link to an answer? Because we're a very good nation for having cows. We're wet, we grow lots of grass. Actually, if we got a couple of cows over here, they'd just go berserk in terms of breeding, wouldn't they? So
oh,
and then
that's
we'd have
Yeah.
lots of milk. Yeah.
True, yeah.
Well, once you chop down the trees for them, yeah. Right, so do we have any more questions? We've only got a few minutes left before we have to clear the call down in case anybody else has got it booked. So if there's no more questions, I'll sort of say thank you very much to Richard and say, can we give him a round of applause, please? Because that was
We
a
can.
talk. Much
Thank you,
appreciated.
Richard.
And to say thank you all for joining us, and I hope to see you all next month. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Bye.
Thank
you.
you,
A
Mary.
lot. Cheers.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
It's fascinating. Oh my goodness. There we go.